Hey everyone. All right, so we're going to talk about introductions, conclusions, and transitions. And the reason we want to talk about this is because you're moving into developing a full speech now. We're looking at your semester long speech. And this week, you're actually going to work on your introduction and your conclusion. And that's actually all I want you to do this week is just your introduction and your conclusion. So let's talk about it. So first, let's talk about introductions. We talked about attention getters a little earlier in the semester, but let's talk about specifically what your introduction is supposed to do. So really in your introduction, you want to grab your audience's attention, and that's really important because in the introduction, if you don't grab the audience's attention, then it's really hard to catch them later on in the speech. So that's what that attention getter is supposed to do, is grab their attention. And a lot of people start with like introducing themselves. Hi, my name is this. We do not start that way. You start with the attention getter first, and then you introduce yourself in what we call a topic revelation statement. Like you introduce yourself later on. You don't start with, hi, my name is, right? And even in the format that I've given you, you do not start with that. You start with the attention, right? So don't introduce yourself first. You start just with the speech with that attention getter. So grab their attention first. Also in the introduction, you want to like orient them to the topic. This is like letting them know what your speech is about. And again, this is not before the speech starts, right? You do all of this in the context of the speech. We're so used to saying like, hi, my name is Shantae, and today I'm going to tell you a speech on this, and then starting your speech. No, no, no. All that is in the speech, right? It's in the context of the speech. It's a part of what you're doing. It's okay. Start your speech. People will get it in the speech. It also, in your introduction, you're going to clarify your purpose, like why you're giving the speech, and then you're going to preview what you're going to talk about. So all of that comes in the introduction. Things we don't want to do in our introduction. A lot of people say like, before we get started, we want to do this. No, once you start talking, that's the beginning of your speech. So be careful with that. That's also why you don't introduce yourself before you start your introduction. That's the start of your speech. The audience isn't going to somehow just forget what you said in that part and then not include that as part of your speech. The moment they see you and you start talking, they're already assessing you as a speaker and your credibility. So when you start talking, that's the beginning of your speech. So that should be your official introduction. Though don't do that. Also, people start with filler words sometimes. Okay, so all right, well, no, no, that's a horrible way to start your speech because you're starting your speech with something that's a negative connotation. That's a filler word. Those are not good things. Remember filler words and those pregnant pauses or those vocalized pauses. Those things are things that we put in to fill empty space. They are not good things when it comes to the audience. They do not see them as positive. So do not start your speech with those. Always start your speech with your first line of your speech. One of the things that's my trick for that, if you have difficulty remembering what the first thing you're supposed to say for your speech, so you don't start with those filler words, if you're one of those people who struggles with them, just write your full first sentence on your note card. And then that way, when you look down at your note card, you're like, ah, that's what I'm supposed to say. And you know that whole full first sentence. So you see it on your card and you're like, that's it, done. And then you just read it. You're like, you read it on there, and you know, so when you look up, the first thing out of your mouth is that first full sentence, and you don't have to worry about trying to think of what to say. Extemporaneous delivery can be difficult in that sense where you're trying to think of what to say because the full speech isn't written on your card. Okay, it's meant for you to have that conversational tone, but if you are worried about the first thing out of your mouth, just write the whole sentence. Helps you. The other thing people do say, all right, I guess we should get started. Well, that works for like workshops. That doesn't work when you're giving an official speech. The audience will know that you're going to start because you're there. So go to the place where you're going to start your speech and wait for them to quiet down and then start your speech. People are smart. They're not kindergartners to say, all right, class, let's get going. Like you're gonna give a speech. They know you're gonna give a speech. We get context clues. We can gather. We're smart enough to get that. And then the other thing that people will say, all right, before I say anything important, well, you just started your speech by saying something. Remember, the moment you start talking in front of that audience, that is the beginning of your speech. So that is important to them. So don't assume that they're not assessing what you just said. That's important to them. Don't say anything important because now it's important. So you don't want to do those things. All right. All right. So next, the thing I'm going to talk about conclusions because your introduction and your conclusion are bookends to your speech. Typically, whatever we do in our introduction, we want to mirror that in our conclusion. So we put them on the same quadrant in our note card because if you did something in your introduction, you should do the same thing in your conclusion because they should be similar. The reason we do that is because our audience needs to hear the same thing. It's kind of like helping them to remember those same points. So don't if it sounds similar while I'm talking about them together, it's because it should sound similar to the audience. You want that repetition for them to remember those things. So in your conclusion, you want to review your main point. You talked about that main point in your introduction. You want to review your those things. Remember, you did a preview in your introduction. You're going to do a review in your conclusion. So if you said my main points are this point, this point, this point in your introduction, you want to do that in your conclusion. Today, my main points were this, this, and this. So it should sound almost the same, right? Doing that. You want to reinforce whatever the belief or the action was in this particular speech that you're giving, right? In your semester long speech, you are trying to persuade us to do something. So, whatever that thing is that you're trying to persuade us to do, you want to reinforce that in your conclusion. Remind us again of the specific action that you want us to do. Remember, I'm asking you to do research to figure out what is the best way that we should support the organization that you chose. And each one of your organizations needs something different. It might be money, it might be supplies, it might be support, it might be time. Whatever the best way for us to support your organization based on the research that you've done, that's what you want to reinforce in your conclusion. Remind us again what we can do and how we can do that, right? Go to this website, meet us at this date, drop off supplies at this location, purchase this on our Amazon wish list, whatever those things are. Reinforce that in the conclusion here again. And then tie back to what you did in your introduction. So whatever your attention getter was, remember I talked about, we'll reread them in a moment, but remember I talked about all those beautiful attention getters. Tie back to that in your conclusion, right? The last thing you do should be a tie back to your attention getter. So if you told a story in your attention getter, then give us the end of that story here. If you gave us some shocking fact or statistic in your attention getter, revisit that here at the end and find a way to connect those two. Give us more information. Always tie back to that because remember what you do in your introduction, you want to try to mirror that in your conclusion so that the audience gets that and goes, oh, I remember that. It helps reinforce what they learned and helps them remember your speech. So make sure you're doing that. All right, so let's talk about the introduction outline structure. We're just going to remember, we're just doing introduction and conclusion this week. We are not doing the rest of the speech, only the introduction and the conclusion. We are building your speech part by part. So not the whole speech, just the introduction. So for the introduction, your outline structure. Now, the introduction only goes on the first quadrant of your note card. So remember, we fold our note card in fours, right? So you're going to fold it in half. And I'm going to use a big note card this week just for references. It makes it a lot easier to see. This is not a regular size. So this is the size. So you're going to fold it in half. Yes, this one has lines on it. This is just to help you. So you can see that there are four sides. So this is 1, 2, open it inside, and 3, 4. Okay. So on the first quadrant, and I'm going to use this so you can see there's lines on it. On this first quadrant, you would do it in half. So you would use just the first half of this quadrant. So on the top half, and my screen is doing weird things. There you go. On the top half of this is where you would put your introduction. You don't need the bottom half. That's for your conclusion. The reason for that is, remember, they are bookends. They're going to be very similar. So what you say in your conclusion should be similar to what you say in your introduction. So you don't need as much space. You're going to split that. The rest of this card, the rest of the sides of these cards, you're going to use for your main points. Trust me, you're going to need them. All right. So in that, on the top of that, you're going to start with your attention getter. We're going to talk about those. We've talked about those attention getters before, but we're going to review them in a little bit. So you're going to start with your attention getter there at the top. Then the next thing you're going to do is introduce yourself and the goal of your speech. And then you're going to preview your main points. So you're going to preview your main points, which would be your, your preview of your main points. You're going to say like, hey, here are the, sorry, first I'm going to talk about this. Next, I'm going to talk about this. Next, I'm going to talk about this. First this, second this, third this. You are literally going to list your main points. It is exactly what I want you to do. People are like, I'm literally going to list them. Yes, 1, 2, 3, just like that. Right? You list your main points. And this one, I think it's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like you 3, 1, 2, 3. Right? These are my main points. Right? And you're going to tell us what they are. So tell us what they are. That's exactly what I want you to do in your introduction. Okay, that's it. Okay. Now, in your conclusion, right, that goes on the bottom half of that first quadrant. Right. So in that, just on the bottom half, you're going to review your main points. So just like I just said, first I talked about this, then I talked about this, lastly I talked about this. You're going to do that. It's just in past tense. So in your introduction, you said, today I'm going to talk to you about this, first this, second this, and third this. In your conclusion, you say, so today I talked past tense, to you about this, first this, second this, and lastly this. Just saying, right? Okay. Then you're going to tell the audience what action steps they can take now to start helping their nonprofit. Remember, I talked to you about what those things are, right? The different ways that they could help. You tell us what's the best way to help your nonprofit based on the research that you did. That's why you did that problem analysis paper, because that is going to tell us, you're going to be doing all the research to tell us how we can help your organization based on the research that you did. Because not every nonprofit needs volunteers. Not every nonprofit needs supplies, right? Some nonprofits, I like to say that a lot of people, and this is an example, a lot of people like to go down to certain organizations and help them build things. And really, most of those nonprofits would say, we don't need you to come help us build. We actually would do better if you gave us the money because we can get those supplies cheaper. We have cheaper labor here. And it would help us more. It would help our economy a lot more if you gave us the money, because then we would employ people here in our community. It would put them to work. We would be buying from local builders. We could get more out of it. So instead of each of you paying to come down here, if you took that same amount of money and gave it to us, it would do much more good. Sometimes they need money and not people. And so this is how letting us know the best way to serve an organization based on your research. Do that. So tell us what those action steps are, and make sure to tell us how we can do it now, right? Remember, persuasion is very specific, and the emphasis on right now, what we can do, not like, all right, remember in our elevator pitch, we were talking about time constraints, right? You want to make sure that we talk about what we can do. Time is important, and you want to give people something that they can do importance now. If you say like, all right, you can go check it out and do more research, and if you want to do this, no, this is persuasion. You're going to tell them what they can do, how they can do it, and right now how they can act to make a difference. This is persuasion. You're going to tell them exactly what to do. Okay. And then lastly, you're going to finish by tying back to your attention getter from your introduction. Whatever that attention getter was, then that's what you're going to revisit. Remember that story, that joke, whatever, you're going to go back to it. All right. And then you're going to say thank you at the end. Now, let's review those attention getters. I did a whole lecture, so I'm not going to go over these too much. But remember, I did a whole lecture on attention getters earlier in the semester. So if you want more detail, go back and watch those, because I did a whole lecture. I'm not going to kill you on that one. Remember, we talked about jokes. Big one is not everybody gets jokes. If you're funny, tell a joke. But remember, jokes are only, the best thing about jokes is if everybody in the room shares the same sense of humor as you. That's when you tell a joke. I'm not a big fan of jokes. Hypothetical situations. We tend to use hypothetical situations for things that are sad. Please don't use that for hypothetical situations. A lot of you have nonprofits that help people in situations that are not good. Please don't use a hypothetical situation for that and try to put us in that hypothetical situation. People don't like that. That's not a good way. It doesn't draw people in. A better opportunity for that would be to tell us a real story about somebody who's in that situation. People connect to the real story more than they do to hypothetical situations. We don't like to imagine ourselves in those sad situations. It just disconnects your audience. Instead, what are good hypothetical situations? Things that happen in the future that have not happened yet. Hypothetical situation would be like something that's scientific or that hasn't happened, something that hasn't been invented yet, something that we have to imagine ourselves in because it doesn't exist, but it's exciting and innovative and encouraging. That's a hypothetical situation that people want to imagine themselves in, not something that's currently happening that's sad and makes us feel bad. Nobody wants to imagine that. That's bad. You're not going to get them drawn in for that. Okay. Questions. If you ask a question, it has to be a good question and it has to be poignant. Make sure it's not a question. And I will use this term clearly. It should not be a stupid question. It should not be a question that's like, duh, of course, like, and I say this because my students have asked this. And if you watched my attention getter video, how many of you have cell phones? Everybody, we all have cell phones. You kind of need a cell phone. It's like, okay, don't ask stupid questions like that. If your question is there, make sure your question is actually relevant. It is thought provoking and is something that draws the audience in. And it is, thinking like that. It should also be a question that maybe has to do with a shocking fact or a statistic. And make sure you understand the difference between like a hypothetical, between a rhetorical question and an actual question, and know if you're trying to do, which one you're trying to do. Because those are, important, right? Because if you're trying to ask a rhetorical question, make sure you provide the answer relatively quickly so that your audience doesn't actually answer the question and throw you off. But if you're looking for an actual answer, and when you have it on a real audience, make sure you are actually waiting for the answer. That usually takes some time. As a professor who actually waits for answers from students, that can be kind of tricky. So be careful. Quotations are fantastic. Remember, you want to make sure that the quotation directly applies to your topic. So please don't pick a quotation that has nothing to do with your topic. So make sure it's directly related, not just something that's inspirational. And make sure that the quotation that the quotation can be something that you can revisit, right? Sometimes we get quotations that you can't revisit in your conclusion. Make sure it's something you can revisit. So important. And then stories are my favorite because you can tell the beginning of the story in your introduction and save the end for later because you can revisit. They're the best. They're really, really good. Plus, audiences really connect to stories a lot because we like a good story and people really are drawn to stories. And if you're a good storyteller, you can really tell a good story. And even if you're not a good storyteller, you can tell a story and the audience will be drawn in. So stories are my favorite. All right, let's talk about transitions. And this is something that I've heard a lot of you talking about, even in your comments and your self-reflections and your self-evaluations on your speeches. People are talking about, I wish I'd find another way to like transition or a better way to transition because I'm using the same transitions in my speeches. So first, signposts, things like these are things that tell the audience what's coming up, like signs on the freeway. So these are first, second, third, beginning with, next, and finally. Those are signposts, and you can get creative with these. First, I'd like to talk to you about this. And then next, and finally, our upcoming, I'd like to start with this. Then I'd like to follow up with this. And then finally, I'd like to end with this. Get creative with those. Those are just signposts, and those are good in your previews and in your reviews, right? Use those. But the audience, it lets the audience know where you're going to go. And then you use those same things. You can use them in in the body of your speech to let them know. First, let's look at my first main point, right? Next, I'd like this. And finally, let's review this, right? You have some things. Those signposts are really good. And if you don't remember what they are, somebody was talking about like, oh my gosh, I keep using the same ones. Write them down. Use your note card. It doesn't have to be neat for me. It's a trick for you. It's whatever you need to do your speech. All right. Now, in your preview, this is actually a connecting idea. It's a transition. You're going to announce in advance what your main points are. It should be similar to your thesis. We're so used to like thesis, like writing a thesis of a paper, that you don't realize that speeches are kind of different. A thesis of your speech is really like what your main points are. That is the main idea of your speech. It's your thesis. So it's kind of a mini outline of your speech. And so that's what we have. Your preview is laying out the outline of your speech. It's your thesis. It also lets the audience know, again, where you're going to go. So example, today I will explain 3 reasons why we should support Senator Harris. First, it's because she is this. Next, it's because she's this. And lastly, because she's this, right? You're laying out your main points. Now in your review, same thing like your preview. Sometimes we call it summary. We use it to summarize the points you covered in your speech, just like your preview, but in past tense. And then we follow up. So now that I've established 3 needs for change, first, second, and third, let me proceed to ways and means. Now, we in this speech will only use the review in your conclusion. However, let's talk about in the real world. You can use like internal reviews, just like you can use an internal preview. You can like have little mini ones. So this is an internal review. Like I'm just summing up something. So maybe in one of your main points, you had like a few things that you covered. You can use a little mini internal review to cover some of those things and then move on to your next point. So you don't have to just use a review in your conclusion. Now, I will tell you in this speech, you don't really have time for that, but I just want to share tips and tricks for you because most of you are using this class for things that you will need outside of this class. So there's a nice little tip for you for something outside. Now, transitions, super helpful. Now, a lot of you are going like, next, I want to talk about this. Next, I want to talk about that. And next, I want to talk about this. So those are transitions, but you could use other things. These are just bridges connecting one part of your speech to the next part of your speech. So it says, I'm done talking about this. Now I want to talk about this next thing. And there's really easy ways to do that. So on the third day, or to sum this up, or my next argument is critical. If you think a little bit about it, you can craft some really cool ways to talk about what's coming up next. It doesn't have to be next. They don't have to always be signposts. You can start with signposts, it's great, but you can always add other things to it. Get creative with it. And they also are ways to really elevate your speech. It really adds to your credibility as a speaker if you can get a little creative with it. So, start. This is one of the reasons why I also give you time to work on your speech, folks. I don't make you write speech the first day. We build it piece by piece so that you can find ways as you're working through it. You get a draft one of it, you get a draft two, you get a draft three, right? We keep working on it. You get time so that you get a little more time to go back to it and redo it. And honestly, that's what I do. I don't sit down and write a speech the first time. I work on a speech, I talk through it, I listen to it, I practice it, I record it, and I go, oh, okay, let's rework this part and do it again and rework this part. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm giving you that opportunity to work on it piece by piece. And that's where we get these really awesome transitions because you're elevating these parts. I don't just do a speech and the first time, that's it. You elevate it every single time. So come up with these really cool transitions. It's a way to elevate your speech. All right, so we had this chance to talk about introductions, conclusions, and transitions. Remember, this week we are just doing your introduction and your conclusion as your speech. Take some time to work on it, right? You're just building it. Get your introduction, come up with a really great attention getter that tells us, really draws us in to think about your nonprofit. I think it to be, great. So, come up with some really great ways to, tell us about your nonprofit. Remember, only the introduction and the conclusion. I'm really just asking you to do the introduction. After the introduction, go straight into the conclusion. That's it. That's all I want you to do. Nothing else. There's nothing else to do in that. And once you're done, you're done. And then you just hit start, go right into your introduction. No, like, hi, my name is Shantae, and today I'm going to do my introduction. Nope, you don't need that. Go straight into your attention getter. Once you finish with that preview, then you're going to go right into your conclusion. And when you're done, say thank you and hit stop on the video. And that's it. And I can't wait to see you.